Well, good afternoon to you. 5:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Hans Von Spakovsky will be with us. He's an attorney, and he'll dig into what the Justice Department is up to with Devon Archer, Hunter Biden's business partner. This weekend, they said they'd like him in prison now, please. Why is that? We'll explore it with Hans, and we'll chat with you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Joining us now, another attorney. The Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia is here, Jason Miyares. Sir, great to have you with us.
Great to be you. Very different than the Attorney General of the United States. That's for darn sure.
And thank goodness. That guy, man. What I don't know if you've been following the Hunter Biden saga in any detail, but if you did, what did you think of this supposed plea deal arrangement last week? Every attorney I've talked to was like, I've never seen such a thing. He was going to be given blanket immunity for literally everything?
Well, it seems to me, listen, as a former prosecutor myself, listen, you don't go into court not knowing. You will ask for a continuance if things are not hammered out. The fact that the compromise the plea deal cannot withstand even the most basic questioning from the federal judge, and it fell apart literally in front of the world, particularly in a case which was this high profile that was going to receive this level of scrutiny. I found it simply astonishing. And you're exactly right. Most prosecutors, I've not talked to a single prosecutor who thought this was anything other than completely abnormal and unusual, and a huge black eye for the Justice Department, and just shocking.
My suspicion, based on the transcript last week, was that Hunter Biden wasn't clued in on what his attorney had actually negotiated. It was this blanket immunity, but Hunter opened his mouth and says, well, I didn't agree to that deal. And that's when everything fell apart. And it was like, well, it was a total disaster that playing out last week. I don't actually know what happened, but there was definitely some funny business going on because the judge said, we got to tap the brakes here.
Yeah, there's definitely something amiss at the Justice Department on so many different levels. And this one gets people frustrated when they feel like there's a justice system that's not holding both sides accountable on equal footing, and then they feel like it's not equal protection of the law. That is not healthy for our democracy, I can tell you that.
No, totally dangerous. All right, let's talk about one of the ways that you're confronting the Biden administration. You've joined up with other states' attorneys general to push back on the Biden administration's plan on phasing out gas cars, the internal combustion engine. What details can you give us on this, sir?
Well, I mean, just so you know, this is something the Biden administration does time and time again. They push very controversial far left policy initiatives, and they don't do it through a bill through Congress. They don't do it through legislation. They do it through these unelected administrative bodies, which can pass these regulations that can have the full force and effect of a law, can in many ways impact every aspect of life in America, but there's never a vote on it. And what I like to say is, don't change my life without a vote. And what the Biden administration does is he bypasses Congress. In this case, he is completely changing and reinterpreting different regulations to somehow give the EPA the authority to ban non-electric vehicles. And so what has happened is, as the administrative state has exploded, and as Congress increasingly decides not to do their job or do their work, your governors can complain about it, but the only individuals in a position to actually stand up and push back on this federal overreach are your state attorneys general. And that's what we did. We had a coalition of like-minded individuals that essentially want to use the administrative state, and they've done this countless times. Just to remind your listeners, they used OSHA to essentially mandate to employers, private employers, you have to have your employees vaccinated, or you are required by federal regulations to fire them. That takes away the employer's choice and mandates this on the employers, would affect tens upon tens of millions of Americans. Not a bill, not something through Congress, regulation through OSHA. We took them to court. We went to the Supreme Court and we won. You've seen this on countless issues, and now they're trying to do it with admission standards and essentially banning all non-EV cars. Takes away consumer choice, and our electric grid can't handle it, and neither do we have the capacity to mine the amount of lithium that is required for these EV cars. So we are literally at the front line pushing back on the far overreach of the Biden administration.
And this is not this isn't like a small nudge, like, oh, this many parts per million of this exhaust is dangerous to people. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a sweeping overhaul of an entire industry and an entire way of living for Americans across the country. And I feel like the Supreme Court has routinely ruled that you can't do that, that an agency can't just make up laws that are that sweeping. We had a case called West Virginia versus EPA that was settled in 2022, which smacked back the Biden administration and the EPA and said, no, stay out of this. This is Congress's job.
Right, exactly. And that's time after time after time again. What they do is they bypass Congress. They pass these regulations to the administrative state. You have different state AGs willing to challenge it, take it to court if need be, and eventually we get to the Supreme Court and they strike it down. But this seems to be what they've decided is they want the administrative state to essentially replace Congress and pass rules and regulation in lieu of laws. And think about it. This is why you have a Congress and a Senate. You have committee hearings. You have witnesses testify. You actually have debate and discussion. And for it to get to the president's desk, it requires a pretty broad agreement by both parties. And what happens when you bypass that is that you don't need it. You can use an administrative state to completely bypass the entire democratic process.
Yes.
Again, I don't think that's healthy for our republic or our democracy.
One other piece here on vehicle emission standards. Isn't it the case that the Commonwealth of Virginia is tied to California's emission standards by law? There was an effort, I know, earlier this year for Republicans in the state legislature to get rid of it, but it didn't work. I mean, is there a chance of ever getting rid of this?
Well, just so your listeners know, what happened is in the last 2 years of the Ralph Northam administration, you had this far-left liberal monopoly in Richmond, and they passed a law that tied Virginia's emission standards to an unelected body, an unelected administrative body in California, which essentially was going to ban all EV vehicles in Virginia. And this wasn't going to be a vote. This was going to be a non-accountable body that would be affecting us. I don't know if we need to be emulating California on pretty much anything. They're having a net migration of 200,000 people out of that state because they've regulated, they've taxed, and they've litigated everybody half to death, and they're leaving. So we don't want to emulate California. It is a huge problem. We had a bill that would replace this, get that consumer choice back in the hands of consumers. Got out of the Republican state House, died in the far left Democratic state Senate. So if you want to be able to have the consumer choice of not buying an electric vehicle, elections have consequences, and these fall elections are a chance for your voice to be known.
Let me shift gears to another subject, one of your favorite subjects. Loudoun County, Virginia, is the source of so much pain and suffering, unfortunately, at the hands of government officials. And there's been some excellent reporting lately by Nick Minnock. He's just a great reporter over at ABC7, revealing that several of the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors members have been essentially stealing from the taxpayers of Loudoun County in order to take well-funded luxury trips all around the planet, flying first class, insisting they deserve it, charging the taxpayers for extra large bags to bring back all of their souvenirs. In fact, here's Phyllis Randall explaining that she's more important than Pete Buttigieg. Listen to this.
Well, I know there's cabinet members who do the same kind of travel more frequently than you do. And they
cabinet
fly.
Members?
Yep, Pete Buttigieg, for example, flies economy. Mm-hmm. He doesn't seem to have a problem, and I don't see him on Polaris business on United.
Well, then that's when the Pete Buttigieg is not the chief elected official of the federal government. I am the chief elected official of the county.
How about that? All right, so when you hear all of that, Attorney General Miyares, is there a point at which too many first-class trips means you're stealing from the taxpayers?
Well, listen, I first of all want to applaud Nick. He is a very good reporter. I do find it a little bit of ironic that the Washington Post, which says democracy dies in the darkness, largely has ignored so many of the stories that have come out of Loudoun in certain areas. And what I've found personally is it used to be that the print journalists were the ones that would do the deepest dives, the biggest investigative reporting would come from print journalism. Now I have not seen that. I've actually seen it's television journalists, actually local television journalists, that are willing to oftentimes report on the stories that the national media or the legacy media won't report on. So kudos to Nick for his dogged work. He is a fantastic investigative journalist. Listen, any investigation of any public official goes through the state police and we work with the state police. And I am not going to, because of that nature, I generally don't speculate or comment on anything of that nature out of respect for the process. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. But I guess I can't even ask you a generic question about this because it would imply the outcome. But my thinking, as I've been watching all of this, is at some point you have to admit this is theft, because their argument is, we'll just change how much we spend, or we'll deal with some of the changes on the edges. But if you're charging $7,400 for a first class trip on United Polaris to and from Ghana, at some point somebody's got to be like, you're stealing. You are stealing money from the taxpayers and then spitting in their face. Julie Briskman. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, listen, I do think that democracy works. I think that's why we needed a vigorous press. And I think this is what happens sometimes, just from an 80,000 feet view, not speaking specifically to Prince William County. But what you have seen is when there is a sense from elected officials that they are invulnerable, they cannot be defeated at the ballot box, then there's sometimes a sense that can occur where they feel like they're invulnerable. And what I would say is everybody who is an elected official needs to be mindful of that. That's the beauty of democracy. The world is run by those that show up. So I would say if the sense of the voters that this has happened in Prince William County, they need their voices to be heard. And I don't know when there's another local election, but if this bothers them, they need to make sure the world is run by those that show up.
Yeah.
The worst thing, I think one of the worst things we have in our society today is a sense of apathy, where people feel like this is just the way the system is and this is the way it's done. No, I think we need to reject apathy. We absolutely need to be able to hold people to high standards, particularly those in all positions of government.
Amen.
So, reject apathy, be involved.
All right. The Attorney General of Virginia, Jason Miyares, thank you as always, sir, for your time. Really appreciate that. Let us go to the phones. We've got Tom calling in from Woodbridge on line 3. Tom, you're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Yes. My question just would be, now, do I understand, okay, she's going to some sister city. Where is this exactly?
In Ghana.
How important? Ghana. So she's going... How is she going to learn best practices from Ghana?
So these Loudoun County officials are flying to
It's a country that has a lot. I know a lot of people from Ghana.
Yeah.
And they come here to get away from the mismanagement. I don't know. This is classic.
They're flying to places like Paraguay and Ghana. They're all over the place visiting the sister cities of Loudoun County and charging the taxpayers nearly $10,000 a flight just to go, and they have to bring staff members with them.
Yeah, because I make a decent amount of money, but my wife and I just look, we can't afford business class. It's just too big a biting in our pocket to be able to go even to Europe.
Yes.
But the thing is,
but what if you were spending somebody else's money, Tom? What if it wasn't your money, Tom? What if it was somebody else's cash? And you didn't even know them personally?
Yeah, well, I have the honesty and integrity to not go down that road.
Oh.
But as we know, a lot of these public officials, they're living high on the hog.
Yeah.
And who decided that these are sister cities? Who makes that decision?
Somebody who likes business class trips to Uruguay. Yeah. So it's so you think it's a scam, is what you're saying?
Oh well, we know it is.
Yeah.
There's no question, because this is classic. I'm from Chicago. Believe me, this is classic. You know, take the taxpayers to the cleaners and live high in the hog while you're in office.
I know. And it's happening in Loudoun County. The taxpayers are being robbed blind, and and I understand Jason Miyares comes at it with some optimism for the voters, but you voted these dummies into place in the first place. They promised it. In fact, Julie Briskman, one of the council members who stands accused of stealing all this taxpayer money. She did. She stole all this taxpayer money. She was the one who ran for office and became known for putting her middle finger up to Trump while she was on a bicycle riding past his motorcade.
Yeah.
That was her claim to fame.
Yeah, that's which brings to, this is where I grew up in. I had nothing but contempt for them I grew up in, because I'm like, but they would elect these people. And I used to have debates. So I was like the only Republican in the whole area where I was at. I was a volunteer firefighter, and all the guys, they were good firefighters, but other than that, these guys, I'm like, how can you sit and complain, and then you turn right around, you know this guy's corrupt as heck, we were talking about a particular congressman, and yet you vote him back into office.
Yeah.
Well, he helps our union. I said, oh, okay. So basically, he's bribing you then. Oh, they didn't like hearing that. They didn't want to hear that.
Yeah.
I blame the voters. They get what they deserve. The problem is they take the rest of us down with them.
That's true. So the rest of us need to shame them. I saw the other day, I know Trump has used the phrase before. A lot of people use the phrase the silent majority. I've been thinking about that a lot. The silent majority. In other words, like normal people out there don't vocalize their opinions. I'm telling you, to the extent you can and be able to preserve your livelihood, whatever your threshold is, vocalize your opinions. Just speak up, because too much of this silence going on means that in the end we get rolled over because very few, not enough people spoke up on behalf of decency.
It's read as complacence, and it has the same effect as complacence.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people, they don't want to say anything, but it's they mumble and grumble in the background. What good does that do?
Yeah.
It's about time. The problem is these very kinds of politicians at all the levels, and the one thing that I would just say, because they all say the same thing, talking about our democracy. I got a real problem with that. We're not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. There is a difference. We have democratic principles,
yes, but
please quit saying our democracy. It's a constitutional republic that's been turned into a democracy, and democracy is nothing more than another form of dictatorship where 51% of the population get to vote 49% of the population out of their money and property.
Yeah, the founders detected the problems. They didn't want tyranny of the majority in our great country. Tom, thank you. Really appreciate the call. All right, stand by. Hans Von Spakovsky is minutes away. We'll talk about tyranny. The United States Department of Justice has been very busy in its corrupt dealings lately. Hans has a reaction.
Yeah, the letter from the Department of Justice is trying to nudge the judge to go ahead and sentence Devon Archer for something unrelated to what we're going to be talking to him about tomorrow. It's odd that it was issued on a Saturday, and it's odd that it's right before he's scheduled to come in to have an opportunity to speak in front of the House Oversight Committee and tell the American people the truth about what really went on with Burisma. So, I don't know if this is a coincidence, Maria, or if this is another example of the weaponization of the Department of Justice, but I can tell you this. The lengths to which the Biden legal team has gone to try to intimidate our witnesses, to coordinate with the Department of Justice, and to certainly coordinate with the Democrats on the House Oversight Committee to encourage people not to cooperate with our investigation, to encourage banks not to turn over bank records, to encourage Treasury not to let us have access to those suspicious activity reports. It's very troubling, and I believe that this is another violation of the law. This is obstruction of justice.
That's Congressman James Comer speaking to Maria Bartiromo over the weekend, reacting to the news that the Justice Department was seeking to imprison Devon Archer, Devon Archer's camp, and the Justice Department saying today that it had nothing to do with the congressional hearing today with Hunter Biden's business partner, and that they wouldn't move to imprison him until after the congressional hearing anyway. What does it all mean? Let me bring in Hans Von Spakovsky. He's the manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative and a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Hans, great to have you with us, sir.
Vince, thanks for having me back.
Does the Justice Department usually send out notices that they'd like somebody to be imprisoned on a Saturday?
No. I worked at the Justice Department for a number of years, and unless the lawyers have a trial coming up on Monday, they don't work weekends. It is bizarre, and although the Justice Department is now saying, well, we weren't wanting him to be imprisoned before his appearance today, I think a lot of that was intimidating him and making him understand that when he's in prison, he's going to be under their control.
Yes. It seemed to me, my hunch was that it was a warning shot. You think that's the case?
Yes. Yeah, no, I think that's exactly what it was.
It's amazing. And so he testifies today, and I don't know how much you saw of this, but he did say that that Joe Biden was on all of these phone calls with Hunter Biden's business partners. He was there routinely. He was about the brand, and that the Burisma deal wouldn't have worked were it not for Joe's involvement. And that seems like how many more smoking guns do we need, Hans?
Well, if this was Donald Trump doing this, Joe Biden would already be in prison. I mean, that is how strong the evidence is on this. And look, that includes, by the way, something that, remember, Joe Biden bragged about the fact that he got this Ukrainian prosecutor fired by threatening to hold $1 billion in aid. And that's the prosecutor that was investigating Burisma,
yes,
the company that his son was on. He bragged about that. And according to Archer's testimony today, at least according to what James Comer is saying, is, Burisma specifically asked Joe Biden to take care of that for them. Hunter Biden to take care of that.
And it's funny, the left wants to impeach Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas because he's got a rich friend with no business before the court. And meanwhile, Joe Biden is straight up getting prosecutors fired in Ukraine while his son is on the board of Burisma, and Burisma is paying Hunter Biden to achieve that very outcome. Do we need a cleaner case of somebody who deserves to be impeached?
No, I don't think so. And look, add on top of that the fact that if there was nothing wrong with what they were doing and the income that Biden was receiving, why did they set up 20 different shell companies that basically laundered this money and paid it out to all these different members of the family? I mean, that's the kind of thing, like I said, that money launderers do. It's a classic mob operation to disguise income.
Maybe they just want to
do that. It was all legit.
Maybe they just want to keep things interesting. It's boring to put it into one account.
Right.
Right. Okay. So you're saying it's money laundering? Yeah, it sure looks like it. The way it's constructed. So one other thing on Hunter Biden. Last week, you had this plea deal which fell apart in open court. Right. As a former member of the Justice Department, as a guy who's seen a lot of these cases, what stood out to you? This seemed pretty atypical.
Oh, it was bizarre. He was basically getting a get out of jail free card. They were recommending probation when the plea deal that we've now seen said that he hadn't paid between $1.2 and $1.6 million in taxes. Okay, those are not misdemeanors; those are felonies. Yet they charged him for misdemeanors and said that he ought to get out of jail. And by the way, everyone should know, in essence, he would get away free for this because the money that he owed was paid by his lawyer as a gift.
Yeah, they classified it as a loan, so he doesn't have to pay additional taxes on it. It is remarkable what's going on. Here's a question for you, a legal question. So Hunter was testifying to the judge last week. She asked a number of basic questions of him, as I guess you do in a plea hearing. And during that time, I presume you're not allowed to lie to the judge as you're speaking to her. And we're seeing a number of reports coming out now that Hunter Biden may have lied in a variety of ways to that judge, Mary Ellen Noreika. One of the ways in which he may have lied is she asked him if he was a member of the bar, if he was a lawyer, and he said yes, the District of Columbia and Connecticut. But apparently Hunter was suspended from practicing law in Connecticut for failing to pay fees 2 years ago. So if you're suspended by the state of Connecticut and then you tell a judge that you're a member of the Connecticut bar, are you lying?
Well, I think the judge could certainly see it that way because you're not fully informing her of the exact situation. But look, that whole plea deal, I mean, that's it's important that he be frank.
Yes.
But that whole plea deal was just an unbelievable way of trying to minimize the charges against Hunter Biden. Keep in mind, they only charged him for not paying 2 years worth of taxes. It was a lot of money. But they could have charged him with much more, except they allowed the statute of limitations to run. That is either incompetence of the worst kind, or it is intended. I cannot believe that the prosecutors allowed that to happen.
And the prosecution is being led by the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, David Weiss. The media keeps saying he's Trump appointed. I keep pointing out the only reason he has that job is because the two Delaware Democrat senators, Coons and Carper, chose him for the gig. I'm right about that, right? This was a Democrat selected guy.
No, that's right, and no one should pay any attention to that. What you have to do is look at his performance, and the performance so far has been atrocious. But by the way, on the statute of limitations, keep in mind that the IRS whistleblowers testified that there was a tolling agreement between Weiss and the lawyers for Biden. What that means is that Hunter Biden's lawyers had entered into an agreement saying, we agree to waive the running of the statute of limitations while we're negotiating over the case. When that was about to run out in November of last year, Hunter Biden's lawyers were willing to extend the tolling agreement. And what happened? Weiss and his office allowed them to expire. So that means they deliberately allowed the statute of limitations to run so that he couldn't be charged with even more years of evading paying taxes.
Wait, so Hunter's team was willing to endure more pain in this, and the Justice Department went easier on him? Does that normally happen, where the prosecution side gives you the better case than the defense?
No, I've never heard of something like that happen. And I checked with several of my friends, including someone who's a former federal prosecutor, and he was astounded. He could not believe that the U.S. Attorney's Office allowed that tolling agreement to expire when Biden's lawyers were willing to extend it. That tells you, again, they were, in essence, trying to give Hunter Biden a get-out-of-jail-free card, the kind you get in a Monopoly game.
If you could be frank about this, you're being frank about everything, so thank you. How corrupt is the Justice Department these days? Because a lot of what we're watching kind of rests on the credibility of these prosecutors, and everything from the Trump case to the Biden cases. And I'm constantly having to tell people, I'm like, guys, the Justice Department has so devastated its own credibility that you cannot, in any reasonable world, reflexively believe they're telling you the truth. What do you think of an institution right now that you once worked for?
I think it has been politicized and corrupted to an extent that we've never seen before. And it's not just these lawyers in this case. I could cite to you numerous other cases where that's happening. I'll give you one quick example. Think to the pro-life activist, the father, who was arrested at gunpoint and charged in Philadelphia.
Mark Houck.
In what was, right, exactly. Well, a case that was so frivolous that even the local police and the Soros-supported DA in Philly thought there wasn't anything to it. They charged him with serious felonies. It took a jury almost no time at all to find him innocent. That was a politically motivated prosecution.
What a disaster. Let me ask you, I know one of your other areas of focus, importantly, is election law in our country. I see an Axios report this morning that President Biden's team has recently split with the Democrat Party's longtime lawyer, most people will know this name, Mark Elias, because of disagreements with Elias's legal strategies and strained personal relationships. According to several people familiar with the dispute, they say Elias argues the Democrats should be fighting on every possible front, filing a flurry of lawsuits and exerting public pressure through the media ahead of the next election. Biden's team guided by lawyer Bob Bauer, is concerned that while Elias's approach may be emotionally satisfying and make for good headlines, it can backfire with the current conservative makeup of the judiciary. In other words, the Biden White House, at least is what they're telling Axios, thinks that Mark Elias is a big loser in front of the court. If he puts his cases, his election cases in front of the court, he's going to lose over and over and over again. What do you make of all of this? What do you think is really happening here?
Oh, I think that is the problem. Elias is making a huge amount of money, a lot of it not just in legal fees, but all the big liberal foundations are giving him lots and lots of money. He's the guy that keeps filing lawsuits all over the country challenging voter ID laws and all kinds of sensible requirements that states have. And while he does win some of them, he does lose a lot of them. And they are most angry at him because he took a case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court recently, a case out of Arizona called Branovich versus Arizona, in which he sued claiming it was discriminatory for the state of Arizona to ban ballot trafficking and to not count the ballots of people who don't vote in their precinct. And he lost. And the left was really upset about that because they didn't think he had a good case to start with, and he insisted on taking it to the Supreme Court.
It's amazing. Man, I kind of wish he was still their lawyer. Anyway, thank you very much. Hans Von Spakovsky, really appreciate your time and expertise as always, sir. Be well. Yeah, you may have heard the news today from Rachel Sutherland here that PeeWee Herman has died. The actor and creator behind PeeWee Herman, Paul Reubens, has died from cancer, the Associated Press says, at the age of 70. They describe him as the actor and comedian whose PeeWee Herman character, an overgrown child with a tight gray suit and an unforgettable laugh, became a 1980s pop cultural phenomenon, dying at the age of 70. They emphasize that he delighted fans in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. That's the film. The TV series was Pee-wee's Playhouse. He died Sunday after a 6-year struggle with cancer that he kept private, his publicist said in a statement. I'm looking through the AP obit here. Regardless of his it's right in here. His children's show performances. Eventually, they say his career was derailed when he was arrested for indecent exposure in an adult movie theater in Sarasota, Florida. Yeah, his reputation ever after was always that, like, oh, he was the guy that got caught in the adult film theater. An adult film theater. He was an adult in an adult film theater. I'm not, trying to say that's a good way to live your life, but it's a rather quaint perversion compared to the crap they push on us. Isn't it amazing? Like, now it's like drag queen story hour for your 6-year-old. Now it's your kid should chop off their genitals in order to become their true selves. The world has become so much more demented than it was when PeeWee Herman was caught in an adult movie theater. It's amazing. Just like where things have gone. Paul Reubens, he was also in, sometimes I think of him as PeeWee Herman, but I also think he was in that movie Mystery Men. Did you ever see that movie? You can answer if you'd like. It was 1999. That was Mystery Men, so this would have been after his trouble, I guess. Ben Stiller was in it, Janine Garofalo, Greg Kinnear, William H. Macy, Hank Azaria. They were all these crazy sort of weird superheroes with bizarre superpowers. William H. Macy's power was that he just hit people in the face with a shovel. I'm not sure that's a superpower, but the shoveler. And Paul Reubens was the spleen. That's what they called him. He was flatulent. His superpower was flatulence. I'm not saying it was the highest of brow movies, but it was a good movie. It was also Kel Mitchell. Remember Kel Mitchell? Do you remember him? Remember Kenan Thompson from Saturday Night Live? He used to be a Nickelodeon. From Kenan and Kel. Well, Kel, I think, I could be wrong. Apologies to the Mitchell family, but I think that was Kel's last big movie, was Mystery Men. Could be wrong about that, but one of many superheroes in it. Anyway, PeeWee Herman has passed away at the age of 70. That's the summary there. I have some crazy stories for you. Well, I always have crazy stories for you, but tomorrow we've got to talk about the left's obsession with changing your gender. You can do that at will. But your race doesn't actually exist as a social construct, but you're not allowed to change it. Those are the rules. The insanity the incoherence of the left. We'll explore it tomorrow. The great one, Mark Levin, is up next right here on WMIL.